You are listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Welcome back to I Am Refocused Radio. Once again, we are here today and we have another show lineup for you all. We have our special guest today, Cynthia Schumacher. She is a remarkable, I don't even want to say her exact age. Let's just say she's doing very well in her 90s. She's a super great person that I hope you will appreciate her amazing interview today, telling not just her story, but her as a author, a poet, and children's book writer, a retired teacher, and education activist who still, believe it or not, is publishing amazing books. We're going to be talking about a lot about her story and about one of her recent books, Prose Pizza. So first and foremost, I want to say, Cynthia, thank you for taking some time today. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing fine, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Yes, ma'am. Well, I appreciate you taking time to be on the show today. Let's start off with, tell us a little bit about your career. I mean, being a retired teacher and education obviously is something that's very important to you. Tell us a little bit about your experience as a teacher.
Yes, I don't know. Ignore this phone. I don't know who's trying to call me. Anyway, well, I started out just like most people. I went to college not knowing what I wanted to do, but I love to read, I love to learn, and I was already writing poetry when I was in high school. And I chose to work in the public schools for 33 years. I started out in high school, then I decided to try elementary for about 11 years, and I went back into high school again. So I've taught all levels, and I found that I did it by accident and found out I loved it because all of my interests were able to be used to the fact that when you teach English, you can teach just about anything because you read literature. So as a result, I wound up teaching for 33 years. Then after I retired, I thought, well, I really need to try to save my writing. Most of it at that time was poetry. And I said, but we didn't have any indie publishing then. So you had to go to somebody who had a print shop, and you said, if I type this for you, could you make a book out of it? I'm going to use some writing that I did from early years and later years and so forth. And they said, yes, as long as you proofread it about 5 or 6 times to be sure it's okay. And then they printed my first book, and that was in 1988. And the people that knew me knew that I wrote poetry, but I never had any kind of thing to hand out. So I was like Walt Whitman when I had my books. I got the books that I walked around and I said, would you like to buy my book of poetry? That's how I got started. And that went on through the rest of my life, because even though I had written a lot of poetry while I was teaching, I also was still writing it. And the short stories that I wrote that have recently been published, I really wrote them quite a few years ago. One year when I took some time off and I was taking a course in how to write short stories. So that's what happened. It was all accidental, but the avocation has proved to be very helpful because now that I'm very old and I can't do all the things I used to do, I don't have Alzheimer's because I'm thinking all the time about what to write. And that makes your mind stay sharp.
When you think about the process of you putting this piece together, Prose Pizza, a collection of 9 short stories, can you kind of share what was some of the themes inside of this, and also what do you hope that readers will be able to take away from them?
Well, I have read short stories by other people. I've read books of short stories, and I noticed that a lot of them, in some cases, certainly a lot of them have been of the same type of story all the way through. But mine are not the same type of story because I wrote 2 of them about looking at people who were married from the outside or from the inside. I wrote one about a very old lady who was afraid of growing old. I wrote one about a child who had to change her plans in the middle of her growing up, and about a man that didn't like cats, and and how he learned to love cats. So I guess I'm saying that I liked variety because when I wrote poetry, I always wrote a lot of variety. I always had some poems that were humorous, some that were contemplative, some that were interesting from a point of view of scientific knowledge, and sometimes they were just for children, fun programs. Because you see, I had taught elementary school, and all the time I was teaching, no matter whether it was in the lower grades or in the higher grades, I wanted the children to see why writing was important. And I had a lot of fun with it. So I consider that reading, writing, and arithmetic are necessary to be educated, but writing is one that is least practiced. And I want to be sure they had experience with that. So that made my classes fun to teach. And as a result, I was able to keep on writing all the time I was teaching school and saving all that till later.
Once again, that's on Refocused Radio, watching us online, talking to our guest today, Cynthia Schumacher, and about her book, Prose Pizza. When you reflect on your career and all the things you're still doing in your 90s, that's impressive and that's amazing, by the way. How did you master the art of writing? What are some of the things that you believe is the core principle of being able to do that?
Well, I think that first of all, you have to be interested in all subjects. I don't think of knowledge as being put in partitions. Knowledge is all connected. And if you read widely, you always are thinking about things. And as a writer who started out writing poetry, I always used to think about things. I was the oldest child in my family. All the children were younger than me. So for the first 3 years or so of my life, I was talking to adults because I was the only child. And then later, when the smaller ones came along, of course, they grew up too. But I think that there are certain advantages to being contemplative in your nature. And I was in a band for 6 years when I was in high school, and I thought, oh, there's a lot of connection between language and the sound of language and the meters in music. So I made that connection. And as a result of doing all of these things, I think finally I realized I'm just looking at other people. I have no classes. I'm going to just try to write like other people. Not exactly the same way, but I'm going to use their techniques to personification. Sometimes you would think of ways. You would say, well, let's see. Time is something you can't stop. So suppose time was a person, and it was somebody that just passed you by, and you waved at them because you couldn't stop them, and things like that. You begin to see connections between taking inanimate things and making them like real things. And I think that when you think a lot, I found a lot of times when people were writing, they get it by a card, say for somebody's funeral, and they would think, now what can I say that's different from the little poem in this card? And I would write something that was kind of reminding you of the people that come and go and how they change our lives. And I found out that many times I was writing things that other people were thinking, but they never knew how to put them in words. So I just had fun of doing that. Consequently, that connected me to other people. And as long as you connect to other people, and they said to you, oh, I don't read modern poetry. I said, but you read mine. Well, yours is different. I said, that's because I'm talking to you. And you're bringing your knowledge to this poem. And when you bring your knowledge to this poem, then even if it isn't my knowledge, we're connecting as human beings. The first poet I remember learning from was Emily Dickinson, who had been dead 100 years, but her name was in an American literature book. And she never published a single thing in her lifetime. Now, how did she get to be famous? So I said, then I have to have a standard. When I write a poem, it has to be so good that 100 years from now, if somebody read it, they would like it. So I have all these little things, little tricks of the trade that I tried. And I would always tell other people, if you write down some of the things you think about sometimes, and you said, think how hard it is to do that. But if you finally find a way to say something you really want to say that you're thinking, then you're learning to write. So that's what you do. You learn it from other people. You really can't be taught anything but techniques, but the way that you actually write becomes from you. And I have one particular book called Soul Flowers that's for poetry. And I said, you write from the soul when you write poetry, because that's different. You write from the mind when you write short stories and novels, because it takes longer to do that. And you have to do so many different things. So I just made a connection between all the types of writing. I hope that explains it. Okay.
Definitely. Once again, this is Refocused Radio, talking to our guest today, Cynthia Schumacher. My next question for you is, in your children's books, you speak directly to young hearts. What do you feel today's children's books need to offer kids in our fast-paced world?
Well, I tried to. I think one of the stories in my recent book of stories is about a little girl who's playing football with all the neighborhood boys, and her parents say, "You got to stop doing that. We're not going to let you do that anymore." She's probably 11 or 12 years old, and she's crushed. But she lived at an age when I grew up, when you could go out and play after supper or whatever, and they blew a whistle when everybody ran home, whether you were in a large city or a small town. And I thought, this is a girl who wouldn't argue with her parents. She would just really think, what am I going to do? And so she thought up a new game, because all the other children were slightly younger, except for one of them. And she thought, I'll play a game of commandos, because this was the years of the Second World War. And she taught them to play a game called Commandos. But during the process of the game, as they played it, over time, she began to morph into what I consider early adolescence. She started reading a book one time in a tree. And it was a famous English novel that was romantic in some way. And she began to realize, I don't think I should be playing with these children anymore, because I'm really different. There's a different world up there. And so out of that change in her life, she made something good that made her grow up kind of in the middle of the story. That was kind of a thing that I thought that story needs to be in there, because there are people like this who tell me I had this experience. I used to be this, but I changed. And then I realized I wasn't a child anymore. I was thinking more like an older person would think. And I thought, well, if you've had the experience and I've had the experience, that should be a good story. So that's what happened. That's one of the ways I looked at it.
When you think about literary arts in school curriculums,
Yes.
why should poetry, short stories, and creative writing take a strong place in education? Because there obviously are benefits, but from your perspective as an educator, why do you think that is so key?
Because I think that's what makes them like learning. If you do nothing but go to high school and they talk to you 6 periods a day, and they don't talk to each other, they don't have fun ways to learn, you can have a very well-managed classroom, but if you make it interesting and you make it come alive for them, whether it's history, whether it's whatever it's the subject, or whether it's higher math or whatever, if you make it interesting to them and you say to them, now, do you realize that people like George Washington were real people? They grew up just like everybody else, and they have this experience. They were not just people in a book. These were real people. So when you're reading this book and you read 2 pages about George Washington, but George Washington lived many years. Think about all the experiences he had. Think about all the good days and the bad days, and try to imagine that you are in history. Someday people will be writing about the time in which you lived. So your life is a story. Everybody has a story. And you're making a life that's going to be somebody's story. Maybe your grandchildren are going to wonder, what were you like when you were young? What did you do? How is your life different? I said, it's going to be very different than you think it's going to be, because even if you have sad things happen, but you have a parent or someone who says to you, it will be better when you're grown up. You just have to be optimistic about your life. And if you are optimistic about your life, you can live past anything and have an interesting life. And more recently, I have been giving little talks to groups of adults who want to know, well, I'd like to write, but I don't really understand how to do that. And I'll say, well, let me tell you, what is the greatest fear of older people besides dying? They say Alzheimer's. I say, well, you think of stories all the time. You're thinking of words. You're thinking of ideas. You're thinking about, how can I say this? Well, I could read other people and I could figure out how they did it. And I said, that means you're less likely to stop using your brain. And so you're more likely not to be afraid. But I said, if you get together with somebody and you say, I'm a grandmother, I want to learn how to write poetry to make a scrapbook for my grandchildren. Cynthia, can you teach me how to write poetry? I said, well, I could teach you how to write haiku. That's just a 17-syllable poem that doesn't rhyme. And I have done that for people. Or I've had people say, this particular poem's I want it for the back of the leaflet when my mother died. I want to put it on the back. I said, that's not your mother. That's just somebody like your mother. Yes, but I said, your idea of your mother and my idea of your mother, who's not really anybody I know, sure, put it on the back. Just put down my name and a copyright sign. I'll give you permission to do that. So you get these connections to other people, and after a while you get connections to people that are dead. You study Shakespeare, and I think about the 2 years that I taught Hamlet to ninth graders in a farm community. Now, the parents didn't have the slight idea of what that story was about, but those kids did. And I thought, how many people have grown up and never committed suicide because they remember that soliloquy from Hamlet, to be or not to be, which most people don't even know what that means, but it means to live or not to live. Maybe when you grow up, if you contemplate suicide, you would think, no, I don't want to do that, because Hamlet changed his mind. You see, it's all connected. Everything's connected. And I tried to make them see that, and they would get very excited. Oh, I have this pet. I want to write a poem about the pet. I said, well, research everything about the pet. If it's a cat, it's not just a cat now. It's a cat that lived it was buried in the tombs with the pharaohs. The cat that's so independent, you can't control what they do. You can't herd cats. They have personalities. They like or dislike people, and you can't control who they like. But if your cat has independent ways, research the cats and write a poem about the cats and bring it to school, and we'll work on it if you want to work on it some more. So this is the way you keep people interested. And in schools, when you have the arts, you invariably discover people that are going to be geniuses, and their parents don't even realize it. That your child has tremendous talents, maybe in getting along with people, maybe in helping other people in the class, maybe in music or drawing or things of that sort. There are all these people unfinished, and you're in charge of them, and you have to get to know all of them. You can't play favorites. You can't say, oh, their religion is different from mine. You can't ever do that. That's the fun of the public schools. And when those people grow up, and years later, they're running the businesses in your town or whatever, and you're the older person, they'll remember you. They'll remember you, help them to learn successfully. So that's why education is so important, and why you need to be that way when you teach school. You have to like people, and you have to say, I believe you are capable of things that I can't even imagine. So let's just think about them. Do all the things you want to do, and ask questions. And if you get problems and you can't talk to somebody else, talk to me, because I'm going to be just like a counselor, the way your parents would be. If you have parents that don't understand you, talk to me. Maybe I'll understand you better, or I can help your parents understand you better. So this is the fun of being in public schools. I hope I'm not going on too long.
No, you're fine. You're perfect. You listen to Refocused Radio, watching us online, talking to our guest today, Cynthia Schumacher, and talking about, at this point, talking about life more than just her book, Prose Pizza. We're talking about life. So let's think about purpose. When you think about what it means to find your why, find your living purpose of what drives you every day. From your own experience, what do you believe makes a person not just be successful, but to have impact in their community?
I think they have to, that's why I think to encourage them to read, particularly, some people have very dull lives, or their homes are not interesting people, or they don't have a lot of books in their homes. And so anybody that can bring them some kind of experience, and they say, oh, I have nothing, I don't know what to write about. I don't have anything interesting in my life. And I'll say, well, why don't you tell me about your life? What do you like to do? What do you wish you could do? What would you want to do if you could do whatever you wanted to? And sooner or later, you're going to find out. You're going to give opportunities for children to talk to each other and to talk to you and to talk to perhaps people outside in the school area. Maybe the custodian is a good friend of theirs. And you get them to connect with other people. It's very important that you socialize. Teach them to socialize with people and to find people that they like and that make them feel better about themselves. And I said, that's why today when children are on computers all day long, I said I probably couldn't teach very effectively in those classes unless I would say, let's close the computer and let's talk about things that we can't put on the computer. And I think that hopefully that will happen as time goes on, because we know that when we had COVID, many children who were on computers, they got bored. There's only so much you can put on a computer. And if you have something called, artificial intelligence, which they have now, who knows how many people will even read a book. When you publish a book yourself in independent publishing and you pay for it, and they say to you, we want to have an online copy we can put on. I'll say, well, are you not going to publish the book? Oh, yeah, well, but if somebody wants to buy the online. No, I said, no, don't know. I sell only books. Because 20 years after you buy a book and you read it 20 years later and you're older and you're a different person, I said, that book is going to still be there. I don't know whether the computers are going to still be here. I don't know what's going to be here. But you've got to think beyond, because anything that is mechanical can control your mind. But anything that is not mechanical, outside that, you can control it. You can think beyond it. You can think of other things. You can think of other worlds. That's why we have so much science fiction with people thinking about, what if we had a universe that was different? I said, we're all getting ready for those kinds of things, but we don't realize, unless we think about them and use our imaginations, we're not able to dream of them, but we can be thinking about them even as we're growing up and saying, oh, I wish I was older. Oh, I wish I was like my brother who's in high school. I wish I didn't have to do this or that. But I said, you never know. You always worry about other people. You say, what if you were born without any arms? Have you ever thought about what it would be like? But there are people that are born without arms, and they still get educated. There was Helen Keller, who couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't speak, and she became an educated woman. But I said, think about that, how you are so unique, and think about the things you can do that nobody else can do quite as well as you. And just remember that, because when you grow up, you'll have a lot of possibilities to think about. That you can learn from even the worst situations. You can learn lessons that are good for the future. I guess I'm just rattling on, but I think when you work with children and you work with older students, and you remember your own childhood and you think about, well, I was kind of solitary at times because I was the oldest child. And my mother died when I was very young. And my father, what was it like for my father to go through that experience and to lose his wife and to have 3 children and wonder how he's going to make a living? I thought about that later and later in life. That would make a fantastic story, but I don't want to do it while he's alive because I don't really know exactly whether he would like it. But I think about that now, and I think about how people years and years ago. Have you ever known why Abraham Lincoln was so brilliant in his writing? Do you know why? I'm asking you a question. How did he learn?
Because
Well,
he was written.
his mother died when he was 9 years old, and she was a highly educated woman who taught him. There were no public schools then. So even though after she died, he had a stepmother and a father who were not highly educated, still he could write the Gettysburg Address. Well, if you can read and think, and somebody's ever interacted with you, even as a small child, when you're 9 years old, that means you're fourth grade. So he knew a tremendous amount, and he knew how to learn through his early life. And that's what made him a fantastic person, able to read, able to become a lawyer. You teach yourself because you have the tools to do it. And somebody's taught you how to use them. And that's why you're successful.
That you've been listening to Refocused Radio and watching us online, talking to our special guest, Cynthia Schumacher. I want to say thank you for not just being on the show, but your great wisdom is most appreciated. And I know your story is going to reach far and wide. And so with that, I want to say to you, how can people support everything you're doing? I'm sure your books are everywhere. Books are sold. But if there's anything you want to plug in and let our audience know how they can further support you, please do that for us.
Well, mainly I just tell people, I say I'm so old, I don't interact on social media or anywhere. But I said, go to either Amazon or Barnes and Noble and say, I want to see some books by Cynthia Schumacher. And I said, you will see some of the more recent ones. You'll see the stories that just came out. And you'll also see probably 3 of my poetry books. You'll see one children's book about Smoky Mountain trolls. Do you know what trolls are? And an imaginary story, because up there they found rubies in all of the water and so forth. And so Smoky Mountain trolls, that's my version of why they're up there. And then, of course, I have one book that I wrote for children who are learning to read. And it's like an early reader book. So you can go online, you can see some of my books, not all of them, of course, but you can see some. And if you read them and like them, then just tell other people about them. Sometimes I call a book club and I'll say, I have a new book coming out. I have no idea who's going to like it. How about read it and review it and talk about it and tell me what kind of audience would like this book. I'll try to advertise it for those people particularly. So that's pretty much all I can do at this age. I can't go out. I can't drive anymore. I can drive, but I cannot drive alone. You have to have something in the car because you may break down on the road, and who's going to stop for the 97-year-old lady? So anyway, that's just the easiest way to do. That way I can't keep up with everything, but the bookstores can sell them, and that way I know that there's somebody's enjoying them.
Appreciate that. And one more quick question for you while we have you here. If you had any words of encouragement to the young generation, or maybe people who are a little bit older too, based on your personal life experience and living a purpose-driven life, what would you say to encourage people?
Yes, I like to talk to young people. Now, some young people are kind of lost these days. They don't, I don't know. I don't know. I'm worried about the future. Maybe I'll never be able to get a job. And I'll say, I'll stop worrying about that. I said, do you realize that people that are despondent about their lives, they never know that a week from now, or 2 weeks from now, or 3 weeks from now, something wonderful is going to happen to them that they wouldn't live to know about it. So you have to be positive. You have to remember that there are people in life that are much, much worse off than you may be, but they've made something of their lives, and that takes you back to the people that are handicapped. I said, you have to say, okay, there's a reason that I'm this way, but there isn't any definite reason that I wouldn't be successful in something, or that I wouldn't be in somebody's life, and my very fact that I was there made a difference to them. So keep looking for people that make you feel good about your life, or they can make your life better in the future, and take advantage of getting to know them, because they've got stories too. And maybe they've been through all kinds of things that they experienced, but they got through them. And I think about the football players in the professional football who say, the first thing I did when I became wealthy as a football player is I bought a home for my mother, who had worked her whole life to get me through school. Well, you see, you never know. You never know where anybody came from. And that's the way the stories are. You see the story, you see the slice of life. This person is a certain way at a certain time. And then you don't know what happened after that story ended. That's why it's not a novel, it's a story. And you can pick an ending. You can make that story, what would the person be like 10 years from now? And I go back to my first story. Have you read any of the stories? You yourself?
Me currently, maybe I should.
Okay, the first story is about a man who buys a little laughing Buddha in a gift shop store because he's picking up something for his wife. And he remembers all the things he used to love when he was young. Cobras in India, and older people who lived in ancient times, and Samuel Taylor Coleridge wrote a poem about the waters rushing down to caverns, and all these kinds of things that he remembered from his young years. And he buys this little thing and goes home, and his wife says, "What is this thing doing in here with my lamp?" or whatever she was buying. "Oh, it's just something I picked up on the way home." "Well, I can't have this thing here. This thing, what if my minister came along? That was a pagan image. You can't put this out. This is the woman he married when she was younger. Now she's turned into this harried, very opinionated woman who's very socially conscious." And he's thinking, "Oh dear, I shouldn't have. Well, couldn't we just put it out?" "No, you can't put it out where anybody can see it." So what's he do? He goes and puts it in a drawer and thinks, "You poor guy, you're not even real jade. And I'm putting you in this drawer." But what is he discovering? The woman I married is different. She's not the same woman that aged the same way I did. She's not interested in what I'm interested in. Is this the beginning of a dissolution of a marriage? Is this a guy who watches Alfred Hitchcock at night on the television set and has bad ideas in his head? We don't know. What's going to be like in 10 more years if you know your wife is not going to age and still like you? Where's this young girl that hung on my every word? That's the first story. It's a very, very simple story. But you see, that's a man who's beginning to realize my marriage is going to be different. I didn't realize she didn't even say, give me time to tell her why I liked it. And he opens the drawer, and what's in the drawer? A ring that he bought one time that had a little thing that opened where you put poison in it during the Renaissance, and a dagger, one of these beautiful daggers with a snake curled around the handle of it. Now, what is he doing saving these things? Because he likes them. Is there any other reason that he will ever look at them different? Now he's got a pagan image in here, supposedly. What is his life going to be like in the future? We don't know. That's the story. But I don't tell you that, the story. I let you see what he does and how he feels. And that's the importance of the short story. You're trying to show a slice of life of a person at a certain time who is discovering something he probably didn't want to discover. And his whole life is blighted because something that he loved, he realizes his wife hates it and doesn't even want him to let anybody see it. I guess that's the first story. But I guess I'm saying that a slice of life is everything that happens to any person, and you pick out one thing, and you pick out one person in one person's life, and then you try to reproduce that in some way. It just kind of send a message. It's an interior thing that you're sending. So that's one of the ways to look at a story. Okay?
I appreciate that. And once again, been listening on Refocused Radio, watching the salon, talking to our guest today, Cynthia Schumacher. Like always, want to say to you, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to meet you.